Hiya, I'm Jasper, and welcome to your video review for Roadhouse. This is the remake version, starring Jake Gyllenhaal. The other person that I saw on the title card was Conor McGregor. The original version had Patrick Swayze and Sam Elliott. So, in this version, Sam Elliott's character from the first one? Yeah, not that character doesn't exist in this one. And honestly, I think it's kind of better for it. I love Sam Elliott. Sam Elliott's a badass, just in life in general, I think, with the movies that he's chosen, and his voice, and in the original Roadhouse. But for what this movie needed, I think it works better without his character in this. So they have changed quite a few things with this. Also, for some more perspective, I never watched the original Roadhouse except leading up to this movie. I watched the original, and then shortly after I watched this one. So I don't have a whole lot of nostalgia and, fond memories from years ago of watching the original Roadhouse. No, I watched that one because I knew this one was coming out, and I wanted to be less lost on, references and things. So there are some lines that get reused. So, in the original Roadhouse, he's getting stitched up, and she's like, did you win or lose the fight, or something like that? And he's like, nobody wins a fight. And that worked for him and his character. In this one, Jake Gyllenhaal, in the original, it didn't make any sense for people to know of a cooler and just a guy who makes bars less violent. Didn't make sense for that guy to be famous. But it does make sense for Jake Gyllenhaal's character, who is a previous UFC fighter, for some people to recognize him and know that he's, somewhat famous. Because if you're into the UFC thing, you probably know all the stars. I mostly know Conor McGregor because of the various times that he's popped up in the news outside of the UFC. So I think it works for his character. But his character, say nobody really wins a fight, I don't think it works as well for his character. And some of the other things that they changed, I don't think make as much sense. Like in the original, they have a guy who is white, who is named Frank, who is like, hey, come to my bar, I inherited it, I'm trying to make something of it, and it's too violent, come help me out, make it a more peaceful place. And in this one, they have a black chick who has inherited a bar, who is like, hey, I have inherited this, and it's getting more violent, and I need some help. I don't think they needed to make that change. They moved it from rural Kansas to rural Florida Keys, if that exists. I don't think they needed to make that change. And link in the description for a whole video that I think better explains why I don't think that was a necessary or logical change. But in general, I think that the movies, things that they changed, from a cooler to a previous UFC champion, I think that makes sense. And I think that what they were trying to accomplish, the logic train for why people haven't gotten more violent, in the first one, there was a lot of logic problems for okay, well, if you're trying to do this, you would have escalated to this point if you had X power that you show later on in the movie. And they never did that. But with this one, I think that throughout, the escalation tactics and the things that are happening, I think make enough sense, even given today's day and age. If you can believe that rural Florida Keys exist, that if you can believe that, then I think that this works for what they established the bad guys are trying to do, how they're trying to do it, and what they do to keep in power, but why they aren't escalating to the level of, burning everything down and shooting everyone right off the bat that they don't like, type of thing. And, they get rid of some of the things from the first one where, he has, a car that he knows is going to get busted in this one. He doesn't have a car because that just makes more sense. Why would you buy a car specifically to get it all busted up? I could see the logic. I could see an argument that there, but in general, I think it just works for him not to have a car. And I think that the character's inspiration and moving forward, I think all of that works. So Jake Gyllenhaal really brings it, and the other side characters, I like Conor McGregor. I only saw one headline where I think it was on Twitter or X or whatever that it was Conor McGregor's terrible at acting. I don't care. I didn't feel that out of this movie. He is supposed to play the crazy ass-kicking character from the bad guys that just gonna kick people's asses. And he does that. It's great. It completely works for his character, in my opinion. So I believed his character. And I enjoyed his character for what it was. I also enjoyed the guy on the boat. So the boat character guy was fine. I think that the first initial introduction scene was trying to show that he's a crazy person, but then further scenes made him seem a more logical person. Like, still a bit of a crazy, but not the level of crazy you're seeing in the intro scene. So I feel like that was kind of left over and just like such an expensive scene to shoot that maybe they couldn't get rid of it or couldn't think of a better way to introduce him. So that one, not 100% for me, but it doesn't totally derail his character either way. So I enjoyed that. And, you know, the side characters, they all kind of work. Again, look at the description for the parts that I think didn't work. But I did enjoy this movie. But the first one was made in the 80s when you had to like go to a place to see titties. So that movie had lots of titties. And that was like, hey, you can see titties in this movie. Now, you can see titties on your phone anytime you want to, at any point in time, like very easily. All the titties. Billions of titties, really. So, they don't have any, they had lots of titties in 1980's one. They have no titties in this one. They even have, like, on the, when it started, I looked in the upper left, I think it was upper left, anywho, that to see the rating and, like, why it was rated that way, and the word nudity was used. And I was like, all right, they're gonna keep a little bit of that. Nope, you're just gonna see Conor McGregor's ass. And don't get me wrong, he has a beautiful ass. Like, it is top-notch male ass. But you see no titties in this movie whatsoever. And I feel like that's a disservice to a Roadhouse remake with how much titties was in the first one. I'm just saying. They kept so many of the other elements, should have kept that. But I can also understand if they were trying to go for the theater thing that they might have cut those out or not included those as part of the story because they didn't need it in the first one. It wasn't like essential and vital to the story, but they did it in such a way that like made it work. Like a lot of Game of Thrones titties. Like, did you need to have the titties? No, but did you enjoy having the titties? Yes. Same thing here. You could have had some titties, but you didn't. That's okay. But this also didn't go to theaters. And I gotta say, things that did not work for me in this movie. That opening scene. So the opening scene is the Frankie character, such as it is. The Frankie character is at this, I don't know if it's a underground fight club or just a club that's very low budget for fighting, but is otherwise somehow sanctioned or whatever. It didn't seem like an illegal operation, but it was not UFC or at like whatever the boxing version of UFC is. So, and it has these two shirtless characters, and it's like, oh, this guy's fighting anybody tonight. This guy's fighting anybody. Yeah, he'll kick anybody. He's on like 8 fights so far, and anybody, you know, win for the night. And then Jake Gyllenhaal character comes, and he's like, oh, fuck that, I'm not fighting that guy. That's bullshit. And so he, you know, the guy who's fought 8 people in one tonight won't even fight Jake Gyllenhaal. Yes, that's a great way to establish that this guy's a scary motherfucker in a fight without having to have him fight. But they do show the guy who won 8 fights in a fight before that. And it is terrible because it's clearly 2 dudes like fighting, but then like, so if this is the face and this is the punch, like it's like it's real here and then there's connection and then it's real after. But there's like this weird section of like where I'm assuming either the stunt double or the actor like stopped their punch or like purposely missed with their punch or something, that if they had just changed the angle or something, then you could have looked like it made a connect. But because of the angle that they showed, they CGI'd, so it's like, so this pace, and I'm exaggerating the slowness, but it's like, you know what I mean? So it's such a sudden acceleration that it's clearly added CGI. And it does that for like every single punch and every single hit in this fight. And it's just so distracting because it's like when something skips forward by a few frames and a few seconds. Like it just doesn't work. It's so distracting. And that's how the fights were. There was not as many of them as there were in the original. But the fights in this, they were trying to be more creative in how they shot it, to be like, oh, look, there's more actors there, and we're able to keep... But remember in the, I think it was the Retirement Plan, how they had that badass fight in the back of the bread truck or whatever it was, and it was set in a dark thing, and it was clear that there was a couple of like sections where they like focused on a solid colored thing so they could disguise a cut, and I was like, they're probably going to start doing this sort of method, but poorly in the future. And I feel like that's what happened. It could be two very entirely different techniques, but that's what went through my mind, is that was a decent implementation for a lower budget movie of that, where when you're looking for it, you can see where there was the cuts, but it otherwise looks good. And yeah, it was low lighting, so they could probably get away with more. But this one, it was lighting, not dark, and they just lasted too long. And not just that opening fight, but especially the last fight sequence, there were so many, like, they weren't even trying to do swipe cuts to disguise the cuts. It was just weird jumps with the camera of like, okay, it's panning like this, and instead of just panning, it's like, and it jumped. It doesn't work. It's a very distracting way of trying to look real, but it doesn't. Sort of like, the original Black Panther, how when they're fighting, you're like, oh, they're fighting, and then they get to the bridge thing, and you're like, okay, now rubber people are fighting. And then they go back and they get the face zoom up, like, okay, now they're fighting again. Oh, now back to rubber people fighting. That sort of thing is how the fights feel with this. By trying to make them look more real, they have made it look less real. And that's really disappointing. So, yeah. I think that the escalations work a little bit better in this movie. I like the side characters were still fun. Like, they still had the very stupid guy that worked for the bad guys in this one. I liked his implementation in this one even better. And they had the somewhat scary dude, and how they implemented that in this one is better. But again, they tried to keep certain elements from the original, like our main character taking a stab to the side in order to prevent a fuller fight. When it's like, but you definitely could have either avoided that stab or punched him back just to stop that fight quickly and not gotten a stab. And then also in the original, he has a bunch of scars, and you're like, okay, that makes sense. But in this one, he's scarless, but then is willing to take that knife. He definitely could have avoided that knife, and he didn't. So, meh. I like Jake Gyllenhaal. Conor McGregor was fine in this. The supporting actors were fun, the kid bouncer guy and his friend, those were fun. There are fun elements to this movie, and I did enjoy it. I liked the scene, or the setting that they were in, the Florida wind and having to be on boats and the weather and whatnot. I thought that added an element to it that would have otherwise been much more boring, set in just rural Kansas of driving around, having it out on boats and taking boat rides out to this, that, and the other spot. I think that added enough character to it to keep things interesting that would have been boring in a Midwest setting based on what was happening in this film. So I wouldn't give this film my recommendation because it doesn't have the appeal and the setting and the nostalgia that I think made Roadhouse such a movie that has lasted in people's memories. And it doesn't have the titties, and it doesn't have fight scenes that will last, and it made some other choices that just didn't work. It's a decent movie, but it is hindered by the fact that it is a remake, and that they tried to have some references to it, but without doing, I think, well enough job at it. So, overall, I would say I enjoyed this enough to not hate it, but I don't think that I will ever rewatch it. But, to be fair, I don't think I'll rewatch the original Roadhouse either. So, I don't know that this movie's all that much better, but from the vague recollections of Googling or IMDbing, I don't think the original Roadhouse did super awesome to begin with and then became a cultural classic somehow. I don't think this one will have that. But, yeah, what did you think of it? What did you think of the original? Let me know. That's all I have for this one. Thanks for watching. Bye.